At a time when big screen heroes claimed to symbolize hope, it was the small screen heroes who actually stood for it. So much so that many believed that they should have been the ones to first form a league. Greetings fanboys and fangirls, I'm Erod and I'm the Blockbuster Buster, and welcome back to a look back at the Arrowverse. Now, when we last left off, Arrow and Flash laid the foundation to one of the biggest superhero franchises of all time. Supergirl soon joined the party and expanded the universe by showcasing the adventures of a benevolent hero who inspires hope by defending the Earth from alien threats. But she was not alone, as the time-traveling misfits known as the Legends of Tomorrow joined the fray around the same time. A series that wisely put Sarah Lance in the lead role, and explored high-concept sci-fi and embraced absurdist humor.
I'm never letting my child watch that show again.
Unfortunately, this is also the era where a lot of the shows started to go down in quality, especially The Flash, almost to a comedic level. Hell, Flash got so bad that Warp Zone made a comedy sketch about the producers purposely sabotaging their own show. They went from a compelling sci-fi drama to lightsabers made out of lightning for no reason. The question is, why the sudden drop in quality? And the answer is pretty much the same reason why comic book runs also fluctuate in quality. Because of the constant rotating creative teams. Not a single Arrowverse show had the same creative team all the way through. In fact, the main reason why Legends was so good for so long was because Phil Klemmer and Keto Shimizu stayed on as showrunners through the bulk of the series. But in spite of the questionable quality of the other shows, the popularity of the franchise was at an all-time high. Now, some folks like to point out that the ratings to these shows were going down exponentially with every season. What those people fail to understand is that the perception of TV ratings changed dramatically as this franchise progressed, and that while the Arrowverse's viewership dropped on cable, it was growing exponentially on streaming. By this point, it had become a tradition for the seasons of the Arrowverse to be added to Netflix as soon as they finished airing on cable, where they continue to draw a significant viewership to this very day. Hell, it was the Arrowverse's success on streaming that prompted Marvel to start producing content for the platform. That's right, if it wasn't for the Arrowverse, we wouldn't have Daredevil, Jessica Jones, The Defenders, or any of the Marvel Disney Plus shows. Think about that for a minute. Suffice it to say, the Arrowverse became a major force on two completely different platforms that relied heavily on its growth and its yearly crossover events that were about to take advantage of the massive popularity of the Trinity. Identity Crisis. For the fifth crossover event, the producers decided to slightly simplify things by leaving the Legends out of the mix. It's alright, they were okay with it.
You missed calls from Barry Allen, Oliver Queen, and Kara Zor-El.
Sounds like the annual crossover. Yeah, that's gonna be a hard pass.
This time around, the cosmic being known as the Monitor decides to test our heroes by giving the all-powerful Book of Destiny to corrupt psychiatrist John Deegan, who uses it to rearrange reality in his favor, and accidentally causes Oliver Queen and Barry Allen to switch lives, in a whole new universe called Elseworlds.
You woke up in bed with Iris? Mm-hmm. We have to fix this right now.
Thankfully, the boys discover that Supergirl is unaffected thanks to being from another Earth. So the Girl of Steel agrees to help the brave and the bold.
Here you are.
Took the words right out of my mouth.
While the other crossovers were super intense end-of-the-world events, this one was more relaxed and full of fan service, designed for fans to enjoy the novelty of seeing the Trinity working together.
I'm the Green Arrow.
Wear a mask.
Sound like that. I don't.
But what's truly miraculous is that in a crossover that is packed with highlights, they still managed to sneak in two major milestones. The first is that the crossover is preceded by the Flash's 100th episode, which sees Barry and his future daughter Nora travel back in time to the show's past seasons as a beautiful tribute to the show's legacy.
I didn't know that.
There's probably a lot that's happened to me that's not in the Flash Museum.
And for those of you keeping score at home, that's 2 Arrowverse shows with over 100 episodes under their belts. And the other major milestone that took place around this time was the return of John Wesley Shipp as the Flash. Yes, we had seen John do cameos before as Dr. Henry Allen and as Jay Garrick, but seeing him don his red suit from the classic 90s series was beyond awesome, which was made all the more special by the fact that this crossover opens with the exact scene that the 90s Flash series was supposed to open with, the world's heroes defeated and the Flash being the sole survivor. Unfortunately, in the case of the 90s show, that particular plan was deemed too ambitious, so it was scrapped and reworked into the show that we know and love. But as a hardcore fan, I deeply appreciate the reference. While Elseworlds might not be as elaborate as the previous crossover events, it is a big bright spot in the franchise that actually had the nerve to challenge one of the most infamous moments in the DCEU, all the while being exhilarating and undeniably entertaining. But Elseworlds wasn't just a crossover event, it worked as two backdoor pilots for 2 future Arrowverse shows. The first was Superman and Lois, which ended up being more of an Arrowverse adjacent show, but I digress. And while Tyler Hoechlin might have been introduced as Superman during Supergirl Season 2, it was during Elseworlds that not only was Betsy Tulloch introduced as Lois Lane, but the foundation for their solo series was established.
Lois Lane. That's all I had to say?
Yeah.
I like this direct thing.
However, we wouldn't see his solo series for a few years, so I'm gonna put a pin on the Man of Steel for now and talk about the other show that was established during this crossover. The Scarlet Knight. Now, for those of you who don't know, created by Greg Rucka, Jeff Johns, Grant Morrison, Mark Waid, and Alex Ross, man, that's a lot of creators. Kate Kane was a rich heiress who witnessed the brutal murder of her mother and her twin sister. She is then raised by her strict military father, Jacob Kane, who sends her to a military academy, from which she is subsequently kicked out for engaging in a homosexual relationship with another cadet. Depressed and directionless, Kate begins to spiral until the day that she is mugged on the streets of Gotham and is assisted by Batman while fending off the perpetrators. Inspired by the Dark Knight, Kate assembles a suit made up of tactical gear she stole from the very academy that booted her, and begins fighting crime as Batwoman. Now, the show had been in development by Berlanti Productions for a long time, under the direction of Mark Pedowitz and Carolyn Dries. The master plan was to introduce Kate Kane in the Elseworlds crossover as proof of concept for the CW, and for the actual show to premiere the next fall. And their plan worked like a charm. Batwoman premiered on October 6, 2019, with Ruby Rose playing the titular role. And the ratings were okay. While Batwoman dealt with street crime just like Arrow, it was much darker, and actually delved into the psychology of the demented villains featured in the series, and for the most part, resembled a horror movie more than an action show. Unfortunately, the series was met with problems almost from the get-go, which ranged from harassment from homophobic hate groups to Ruby Rose suffering a very serious back injury early in production that required emergency surgery. And then Rose was not granted adequate time to recover from her surgery before she was required to return to work, which created friction between her and the creative team, which escalated to her leaving the series after just 1 season. Thankfully, Rose would grace us with her portrayal of Batwoman for one more crossover, one that would see her and the rest of the heroes of the Arrowverse team up with the latest hero to join the franchise. High Voltage Hero. Now, for those of you who don't know, created by Tony Isabella and Trevor Von Eaton, Jefferson Pierce was born with the Metagene, which allows him to manipulate and channel electrical fields, abilities he kept hidden through most of his childhood, until his father, renowned journalist Alvin Pierce, was murdered, and Jeff was taken in by former special agent and current tailor Peter Gamby, who raised Jeff and taught him how to best control his powers. Now a husband and a father, Jeff returns to the suicide slums of Metropolis to take up the position of principal at Garfield High School, only to find the neighborhood riddled with crime and under the control of criminals like Tobias Whale and gangs like the 100. So Jeff starts putting his powers to good use and push back against injustice as Black Lightning. Like Supergirl, Blacklightning was yet another show that Berlanti Productions and the CW saved from the mishandling of another network, as Blacklightning was originally supposed to premiere on Fox. Developed by husband and wife duo Mara and Salim Akil, the pilot to Blacklightning was initially ordered by the Fox network, who opted not to go forward with the series after the pilot was completed. Thankfully, the CW saw the potential in the series and picked it up, effectively making it part of the Arrowverse. Blacklightning premiered on January 16, 2018, with Cress Williams playing the high-voltage hero. Two pretty good ratings, even for TV at the time. And while it never quite reached the viewership of Arrow, Flash, and Supergirl, it did have a very loyal fan base that stuck with the series all the way to the end. Now, while Blacklightning also dealt with street crime and the advent of superpowers, it was the only show in the franchise that had the courage to deal with the social, political, and racial ramifications of being a vigilante, which in my humble opinion, made it the show with the strongest writing, as Blacklightning was one of the very few shows in the Arrowverse that always had something meaningful to say.
I accept full responsibility for the consequences of my actions, as I would expect from each and every one of you.
However, the number one complaint about this show had nothing to do with the show's actual content, but more with the fact that this was the show that crossed over the least with the rest of the Arrowverse. Now, there's a very simple explanation for that. Blacklightning was shot in Atlanta, while the rest of the Arrowverse shows were filmed in Vancouver. So yes, much easier to have actors from one show appear in another when they're just a soundstage away, as opposed to a few thousand miles. But don't fret, the crossover conundrum would be solved very soon, as Batwoman and Superman and Lois were not the only two future installments that were established by Elseworlds, as very much like the first episode of The Flash foretold, in the future there would be a crisis. The second crisis. Before we jumped into the biggest and most ambitious crossover in the history of the franchise, I have to highlight two major milestones that Supergirl reached this year. Number 1, the Girl of Steel finally got pants.
Tara? In pants?
Secondly, and more importantly, Supergirl reached her 100th episode. In a reality-bending journey where, thanks to Mr. Mxyzptlk, Kara explores alternate versions of her reality, if she had made different decisions in her superhero career. So again, for those of you keeping score at home, that's 3 Arrowverse shows with over 100 episodes under their belts. And that's not bad. Anyway, let's talk about not just the biggest event to ever transpire in this franchise, but one of the biggest events in all of comics. Crisis on Infinite Earths. As it turns out, Elseworlds was just the Monitor's audition to find worthy champions to take on a much bigger threat, as his counterpart, the Anti-Monitor, plans to erase the Earth, every single one in the multiverse. So the Monitor gathers all the greatest heroes in the multiverse to take on the threat.
There's too many of them.
You want some help?
This crossover was massive, spanning 5 different shows, and involving characters from almost every DC TV show from the past, present, and future. Hell, even the creator of Crisis on Infinite Earths, Marv Wolfman, makes an appearance.
Marv, M-A-R-V, you're welcome.
And while it might be a bit convoluted, it was a wonderful love letter to all DC fans, one that fans from every era can appreciate.
Let's do this.
Some feel that Crisis on Infinite Earths was when the franchise jumped the shark. It was an event so big, so massive, that it would never be surpassed. And honestly, it's hard to argue otherwise, as Crisis not only marked the end of an era, but the end of the show that started it all. The Emerald Archer's End. From the beginning, Stephen Amell and Mark Guggenheim had a verbal agreement that if Stephen ever wanted to leave the franchise, to let Mark know with plenty of anticipation. And right before production began on season 7 of Arrow, he did. So Mark convinced him to not just stay through season 7, but through one more extra short season, so Oliver can be part of the crisis and receive the ending that he deserved. The final season of Arrow is a 10-episode farewell tour that basically plays the show's greatest hits, revisiting most of the fan-favorite characters, locations, and storylines from the series, all building up to Oliver keeping the promise that he made to the Monitor the previous year. You see, in the comic book version of Crisis on Infinite Earths, two major heroes died during the event, Supergirl and the Flash. And that was going to be the case in the Arrowverse. However, upon learning about this, Oliver offers himself up as the hero who makes the sacrifice, so his friends and allies can survive and continue the fight.
You remember what I told you?
Dying is the easy part.
Arrow aired its final episode on January 28, 2020, in a somber but loving tribute that sees our heroes gather for Oliver's funeral, a scene that led to an infamous behind-the-scenes photo that birthed 1,000 memes. And all of this is transpiring as Oliver's friends and family reminisce about the mission that convinced Oliver to change from a violent vigilante to a legendary hero. These flashbacks include one of the most badass fight sequences in the entire series, a 3-minute long continuous take featuring Oliver battling an army of mercenaries standing between him and his target. This sequence stands as an achievement in fight choreography and stunt work that gives the likes of Daredevil and Into the Badlands a run for their money, especially when you consider that this sequence was achieved with a smaller budget and less time. While Green Arrow was about to meet his end, he met it in the way that he always did, fighting. The 8 seasons of Arrow served as a microcosm of comic book adaptations. It starts only resembling its source material superficially, and little by little as the years went by, it continued to embrace its comic book roots more and more, to the point that no concept was too outlandish, inappropriate, or questionable to cross paths with the Green Arrow.
What's that? That would be heat vision.
And thus, after 8 seasons, 6 crossovers, and 170 episodes, Arrow came to an end. And it was one hell of a ride.
Sunburn! You have failed this city.
Unfortunately, while Crisis on Infinite Earths had a very hopeful ending that sees our heroes form the Justice League to protect the Earth in Oliver's absence, it was his very absence that marked the beginning of the end, as many trials and cancellations laid ahead for the Arrowverse, as our heroes were due to face one final crisis.
Add it to the list.
I think you missed me.
Not as much as I missed this. Let's go kick some ass.